All right, I'm at it again. This is going to be another long one. I wanted to just do a fireside chat, but decided I needed the board. For those of you that can't stand long ones, I'm going to present to you a summary done by one of my colleagues in printed form. Obviously, very meticulous guy. One of the great things about being a Synergenics doc is there's a bunch of other docs from various disciplines. Bhavesh was trained family practice, but he clearly is extremely bright and has put together a wonderful document, which I'll post, because I don't know how to post documents on YouTube. I will post this on Facebook Wellness Patients and on Alaska Coronavirus Fighters if you want to have access to this. I released it to all of my Synergenics patients because he did such a good job. It's a great cliff note, rapid, every issue you might think about kind of guideline, from understanding the disease, the testing, the things you can do to help yourself to do better, everything. It's great. I loved it. I'm going to actually use it kind of as a template for talking. I'm just going to hit the high points, and then a few of the issues I'm going to really drill down on, also showing you some great resources that I've found online if you got nothing better to do but just try to figure out coronavirus and scratch your head. Anyways, going along with the document, this is just one. As you can see, I released it to all my patients in my data bank. He sort of gives a presentation of what he's going to try to cover there and an outline. And so starting with what is the status of the virus and what's your risk of catching it, he has highlighted the cat is out of the bag. So, okay, for sure, best case scenario is probably the vast majority of human beings on this earth are probably going to get this virus at some point, barring a vaccination coming out before the first, second, third, and however many waves there are get to everybody. We don't have a clue who's got it. I mean, we know who's got it. We have a clue, some of who's got it. We really don't have any idea how prevalent it is in various settings because of the testing, which we'll cover later. This thing is highly transmissible, which is the thing that is so bad about it. I think it's got some ability to cause a lot of problems, particularly in the compromised. And the combination of those two things, the overwhelming of the healthcare system, is definitely a risk. And these mitigation strategies I do support, so you know. The social distancing, the business closures, the crippling of our economy. Mainly because I think that without that, the loss of human life would be something most of us wouldn't be willing. Truthfully, I think we would self-quarantine. If the government did nothing and just let this thing go, everybody's got somebody they care about that's compromised. And once the writing was on the wall and, you know, the hellish sort of environment that New York City was, and you hear the doctors talking about, and you're picturing your grandpa dying in a hospital room by himself because nobody's allowed to visit him. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to make you realize that we'd probably start pumping the brakes on our own with how we're behaving. I'm a little worried about the fact that we're already talking about a strategy to reopen, and we're going to talk about that in depth when I show you some other resources. Bottom line is, expect to get this thing unless a vaccination comes out before everybody gets it, if we do really well with mitigation. Focus on making your body healthy enough to handle it. So he points out the second wave is coming. I agree with him. The places that are going to be easy to watch are the places where we can pretty much extrapolate that there's a high level of disease present. Let's take New York. I'll show you the website where it shows how much infection there is per testing, and it's around 20% in New York. So if you get a test, and the criteria for getting a test is you have symptoms, and you can either have one of the major symptoms, which is cough, fever, or shortness of breath, or two of a bunch of symptoms, which basically if you got any viral illness, you probably got two of those, okay? So if you have a viral illness and you have a known exposure, you've been in a really high density of exposure, you are compromised, or you're a healthcare worker or a front line, you're pretty much, they're gonna waste a test on you. And asymptomatic people, not at this point, but we need to test those eventually. So, with that being the constraint on testing, if you get tested in the state of New York, your risk of a positive test is pretty high. If you get tested in certain counties in New York City, your risk of a positive test is about 80%. In several places, like here in Alaska, if you get a runny nose and a sore throat, I think the pre-test probability is you probably don't have COVID because it's not really here yet. Is that going to change when we release the second wave? I worry it will. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so let's get down to what he talks about for building a strong, resilient immune system. You don't want it underactive, you don't want it overactive. A lot of this comes into that inflammatory balance. An overactive immune system comes from constantly pounding your body with molecules that it's really designed to think of as foreign. And so truthfully, at the basis of this is how much do you eat according to your ancestral diet, which is the molecules your body's expecting to be put in them on a daily basis, and how much do you eat molecules that shouldn't be in there. That's a Cliff Note version. Specific foods, he's talking about fruits and vegetables. Well, as you know, I'm a 3 servings of low glycemic fruit daily, fiber, antioxidants, and lots of vitamins and micronutrients. 5 to 7 servings of vegetables a day, and just to remind you, vegetables are things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, asparagus. Corn's not a vegetable, and rice ain't a vegetable, okay? So we're talking about real vegetables. And they're, again, fiber, micronutrients, antioxidants, okay? All things that have been shown to improve our health and wellness for sure. Then he gets down to healthy fats, omega-3s and 9s, okay? Well, healthy fats. You know that I believe in shifting your omega balance towards the anti-inflammatory side with supplementation, but there's natural sources for that, for those omega-3s. The animal kingdom, primarily we think of seafood, mackerel, smash, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring, okay? Great, got lots of omega-3s, and you get the protein too. In the vegetable kingdom, the omega-3s are prevalent in things like chia seeds, flax seed, hemp seed. Those are also high in fiber and have some protein in them. And then all of your green leafy vegetables. So that'll help get your inflammatory shift, right? And then also I want to point out that you want to have some protein intake, because amino acids are how we construct antibodies. And I just think it is just logical sense that having an adequate supply of essential amino acids like you would get on a clean animal protein, high plant-based vegetable protein diet is going to give you the best chance to be able to mount the best immune response and make the most antibodies that you can in the event that you have to fight an infection. And then he points out kind of leading towards the microbiome. You've got to feed the microbiome. You can eat fermented foods, sauerkraut, kombucha, yogurt. You will get some mixtures of some of the healthy bacteria. probably a probiotic. I think probiotics are integral. One of the no-brainers: fish oil, vitamin D3 with K2, and probiotic. I think they're important, but certainly foods can help. And the prebiotic concept, the foods that the bacteria can live off of, onions, radishes. He gives a listing of some. Does a very nice listing at the end. So anyways, he's got a nice little food listing there. Today I've already eaten bell peppers and strawberries and eggs. And I've had some nuts and seeds today and a half avocado and a handful of legumes. So I'm kind of going down the rack here. I see we're going to be eating some plank salmon tonight, so I'll get that out of the way. I'll let you read about his detoxification. Exercise. Okay, exercise is huge, obviously. You guys know I'm a big fan. With the kids sitting around homeschooling, and I try to stand. I did a lot of reading this morning. I stood for a lot of it. I reviewed some charts. I stood. The kids are sitting around. They don't walk from class to class. They're locked in their rooms. They do a little Skype. They're keeping up with their schoolwork. We get out and walk the dogs and stuff a little bit, but their activity levels dropped way off, as has mine. I mean, I'm not moving around as much just naturally. So even more important to kind of fake our bodies out into thinking that we have to deal with strenuous stuff. Interval training. I am going to film the family intervals within the next couple of days. We have a little bit of fun with it. It's painful, but it's a family thing. I know that I'm getting those kids 3 days a week, getting their heart rate to maximum level. I'm getting some of those special hormones that clean up the system at least 3 days a week, so they're not just completely sedentary for however long this lasts. Exercise is big. I really liked, I actually took a picture of the Beachbody commercial, because Beachbody, which is like P90X, Insanity, all these stationary exercise regimens that you can do in your home in front of the TV, is offering 2 weeks free. I will make sure I take the snapshot on my camera that I saw on the TV. It's like text 30, 30, 30 and put in something, but I'll get that on the wellness patients also. So you can join Beachbody for free for 2 weeks, have access to all of their videos. I've done Insanity, I've done P90X. They're difficult, but if you do them, you're going to get some results. So anyways, I thought that was a great idea. He put that in in this as well. Peloton, Simple Things Exercise Band. Points out something else I like to point out: get outdoors if you can. I try to walk outside when I can. We're ugly, rainy, still icy, bad timing. I'm supposed to leave for Hawaii at midnight tonight, so you can cry along with me. Hawaii is still closed. Sleep. I'm not going to belabor sleep. He's got nice things in there that you can read about. I'm going to do an entire talk on sleep. I promised one of my best clients who has sleep apnea. He's an excellent example of what an amazing transformation you can accomplish if you do the things I tell you to do. Anyways, he has sleep apnea. He's also an expert in sleep apnea, and he owned a sleep center for some time. He doesn't do that anymore, but he helps market it. And I promised him I would talk about sleep and how it affects COVID. But in general, sleep affects everything. If you don't rest properly, cellular function deteriorates. I'm going to talk about some of the specifics of sleep apnea, and I will discuss some of the other important aspects of sleep in that talk coming up in the next few days. Stress. Okay, well, I don't know. It's hard to mitigate stress. So far I'm doing pretty good being stuck at home with the kids and a bunch of cats. My wife does cat rescue. Meditation, excellent. I do try to meditate. Gratitude journal. I just try to think a lot about all that we have to be grateful for. I'm still saying grace with family over meals, which is a form of gratitude. So we still have a lot to be thankful for. We're going to make it out of this eventually. And then, he talks about medical health and blood pressure, hormones, cortisol and insulin. He does mention obesity, and my next talk tomorrow is going to be, it's actually going to be about motivation, but I'm going to base a lot of it off of obesity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in this talk. Obesity is a big risk factor. So he's got some little tidbits in there. And then he goes through a nice list of immune boosting supplements. I'm not going to read through the list. I will tell you that of the list, I take D3 with K2. I take a little N-acetylcysteine. I take curcumin. I take resveratrol. Obviously fish oil. And I take kind of a multivitamin antioxidant blend that probably picks up some of the other stuff that he's recommending there. He gets into talking about testing and some of the blood type stuff. Interesting concept, I guess, with the blood types is that apparently not being A, meaning you have antibodies to that A blood type, is providing some increased protection. So if you don't have an A blood type, like your B or O, you theoretically have antibodies to the A blood protein, and those antibodies seem to be protective. But he's talking about some different presentations. The main thing I want you to keep in mind is if you think you have a viral illness, you could have COVID, but what is the pre-test probability? There's two tests, right? We've got a bunch of tests out there that are testing for the virus itself, the actual RNA of the virus for the most part. Unfortunately, if you can find the sensitivity and specificity of the test that we are using reported somewhere, please send it to me. I don't think anybody knows. You don't see the task force people talking about those numbers, and quite frankly, until you know how sensitive a test is, meaning are there false negatives, and how specific it is, meaning if it's positive, do you actually have the disease? I'm more worried about the false negatives right now, okay? I think the testing is pretty specific, but the false negatives are a problem because if it's 25%, a negative test doesn't mean that much. It just means we don't know for sure you do have it. So we're fighting a battle in the dark. We're flying by the seat of our pants with no instruments in the dark. It's not easy to do. And that's why I'm still concerned about, we're talking about relaxing social distancing and all this quarantine. I think we're going to see a huge whoosh. I worry we're going to. So we can test for the actual virus. And I hear the 15-minute test is not looking that great all of a sudden. And again, I'm having a hard time getting the clear data on that. So I don't know that we have great testing yet to test for the virus. We can test for the presence of antibodies to the virus. That test is supposed to come out, the FDA-approved one, any day now. It's going to take time to test a lot of people, you know. We're not going to have that right off the get-go. I'm sure we're going to test healthcare workers. I'm sure we're going to test people we know had the virus to get an idea of how good of an antibody response. We have no clue how long you will remain immune to the virus if you were exposed. These are all unknowns. We also don't know this virus isn't maybe going to change, which if it does like influenza, man, are we ever in trouble. If it stays this transmittable and can shift its shape, to where we don't recognize it, and it still does all this bad stuff. I mean, oh, we're in trouble. I'm a little nervous about talking about letting it spread again and see what happens at this stage of the game. Hopefully we'll have a good antibody test that's reliable, inexpensive, that we can test large volumes of people. If we test random sample, regardless of whether they had symptoms or not, we're going to be able to determine what the prevalence of the disease was across the country, okay, in various geographic areas and as a whole. We'll also get an accurate number of the percentage of death. And I think it's going to be like kind of one of three things. Not very many people got this, and it was pretty darn infectious. More people than you would have think had got it, or pretty virulent rather, meaning just causes bad things. More people, we know it's infectious, more people than you think got it, but maybe 50% of the population across the entire United States, when it's all shakes out after the initial wave and the pandemic's kind of over, 50% have antibodies. Or maybe we'll get lucky and it's like, wow, we had no idea how everybody had it, and just isolated areas like Alaska and Montana still have to worry about a real outbreak because there's no immunity, and maybe we'll get a vaccine before that happens. It's going to be one of those ranges. I'm afraid it's we're identifying half or a third of the cases because they have the more severe symptoms, they meet the testing criteria, and there's still a huge portion of the population that's unexposed. And that'll be bad news because then we're waiting on vaccinations and we're waiting on treatment. He gets into medications. It looks like he's pretty much on board with me. Suffice it to say, I would highly consider using hydroxychloroquine if you tested positive for COVID-19. So I think I might save it for if you're getting significantly symptomatic, if you're worried about transmitting it to a feeble young loved one. Certainly it looks like hospitalized patients. So I'm going to cover some of the studies again real quick. He talked about the concern with the prolonged QT interval and arrhythmias. Be aware, it's a pretty safe drug. You should take magnesium. Most of you probably, if you're my patients, already do. But magnesium can prevent the arrhythmic problem called torsades de pointes. That is the theoretical concern here anyways. So keep your magnesium levels up. I supplement. I think that's worth mentioning. I certainly, anybody that I prescribe it to, if I'm forced to do so, I'm going to make sure they're on magnesium supplementation. Okay, let me see. He talks about returning to society, and I think I'm going to cover that in a bit. He did a great job. So that's available to you if you'd like to read it. All right. So I want to take you to this site. I'll go ahead and post this on the Facebook page. It's the New England Journal of Medicine COVID-19 page. And you can drop down and read all kinds of scientific studies. If you really want to be grossed out, the sneeze one is pretty nice. The coughing one, you can get into seeing just how far a high-speed sneeze travels. But there's a lot of cool stuff. Some of it's going to be a little more scientific probably than you're prepared to digest. I would like to show you a really cool site because it's kind of interesting. It's like you can look at, well, we'll do the initial run here first because it's kind of cool. This shows you. Here we go. Okay, this is the world, and it gives you the option to filter countries, and you can play this over time. So it's the date at the bottom that's running across. You can see right now, right there, you just made it to January, into February, February 15th, February 20th, and it shows you the density and where new ones are. So you see this thing spreading across the planet, and they keep this thing active, so it's a pretty neat site. Again, it'll be on the New England Journal of Medicine site. So you can see all these new cases cropping up in the US. So what makes it kind of really interesting is you can zoom in and you can get to an area of concern for you personally. And so like I kind of keep looking back at, like for example, I was out of town in Montana and got quarantined, but where was I? I was right here, right where my little hand is. And as you can see, nada. We got nothing. Those people could probably go back to normal life right now. Eastern Montana. You see what the problem is, it's population density. Alaska's a great example, I mean, my skill set. Okay, if we didn't import this disease and we did a good job in these 3 weeks of quarantining, and maybe we extended another couple weeks, we might not have, it may just fizzle out here, but we're going to import it because we're going to try to have a summer season. If you hadn't figured it out, I'm not in favor of that right now. Until we have reliable testing to rule out infectious people, some sort of idea of what our herd immunity is, and a massively ramped up capability of managing severe respiratory distress in the largest state in the nation with everything so spread out, I think it's really, really a hazardous plan to start trying to bring in people from, I'm not good at this, to start trying to bring in people from here. I don't want people from yellow places, which is, greater than 2,000 cases, showing up in Alaska in the next 2 weeks. I think that's crazy, but maybe that's what's going to happen. I don't have my finger on that pulse. Okay, so I'm sorry. Back to the rest of this. There's some interesting editorials at the bottom that talk about trying to reopen society. Anyways, some of you might find this a nice source. I will put that in the Facebook wellness post. All right, that got me through that. So, this is an interesting site that shows testing data information, and I like it because it gives you an idea of how much testing is being done. Now, you can see that if you look at total tests, and this is updated every day, April 15th, the United States, we've tested more than anywhere. We've tested over 3 million people. Now, you can look at other representations that maybe look like we're not doing as good a job. This is the tests per 1,000 people, and Italy's winning. But of course, they were one of the first countries to get the disease, so they're ahead of us in terms of they started before us. And you can see that our testing per 1,000 people is getting pretty steep. It's about the same slope as Italy's. Anyways, I wish the site also included the percent positives. You almost have to blend the two, the one that I just showed you in this, to come up with kind of the density of where the disease is. It's got some interesting sites, but you know what? Like I told you, my opinion is, until somebody tells me what the sensitivity and specificity of these tests we're running is, I don't know how it's supposed to help me or help me make decisions. All right. I like this site. It's for the United States, and it does show. What I like about this site is you get an idea of the prevalence of the disease, at least relative to other places. Again, since we're not testing everybody and you have to have symptoms and fall into a certain algorithm to be tested, it's not to say that in New York, for example, 526,000 tests and 213 positives, it's not to say that the disease has a 40% prevalence. It has a 40% prevalence in the population that meets testing criteria. If you look at the asymptomatic population, it would be less than that. But it does give us an idea, and as you can see, one of the places with dense metropolitan areas are faring poorly. Pennsylvania's starting to catch up. Pretty much the Northeast. Then these other Chicago's and Detroit's. Those are what's driving those numbers up. And when you start getting to some of these western states and Great Plains states where everything's spread out, the positive test result is low. I mean, that's what these graphs are representing. You've got 29,000 tests and only 2,000 positives. That's a little over, that's like 6 or 7% positive. And then you get down to good old Hawaii and Alaska. Hawaii's doing great, 19,000 tests, 500 positives. That's going to be about 2.5%, a little bit higher. Alaska, Montana, really low positive rate, 9,500 and 404. Wyoming, 6,287. And Alaska, 8,600 and 293. We've been hovering around 3.4% positive rate for testing. So it's not very prevalent here. Great site. I'll make sure I include all of the links on my Facebook post today. Facebook Wellness Patients. Just search it. Okay. So let me see. I'm just going to read this abstract to you. Projecting the transmission dynamics of SARS-CoV-2 through the post-pandemic period. This isn't good news, people. Hopefully these guys are not smart, but they probably are. So the urgent need to understand the future of severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2 transmission. They used estimates of seasonality, immunity, cross-immunity from other coronaviruses, and from a series of data from the USA to inform a model for transmission. They projected that recurrent wintertime outbreaks will probably occur after the initial most severe pandemic wave. Absent other interventions, a key metric for success of social distancing is whether critical care capacities are exceeded. To avoid this, prolonged or intermittent social distancing may be necessary into 2022. Additional interventions, including expanded critical care capacity and an effective therapeutic, would improve the success of intermittent distancing and hasten the acquisition of herd immunity. Longitudinal serological studies, that's the antibody test where they draw your serum. It's a blood test as opposed to the swab, which is looking for the virus. Longitudinal serological studies are urgently needed to determine the extent and duration of immunity. Even in the event of apparent elimination, 2 surveillance should be maintained since a resurgence in the contagion could be possible as late as 2024. Oh, ain't that special. Okay, that's in science. All right, I want to talk about, since we made the statement therapeutics, what's in our armamentarium right now? Well, the big hoopla is all about hydroxychloroquine, Zithromax. I would throw zinc in there. It's cheap. You can still get Zicam. I bought 4 bottles the other day. In there, I think that's worthwhile. And don't forget your magnesium. But anyways, this test came out just today, and I read it. No evidence of clinical efficacy of hydroxychloroquine in patients hospitalized for COVID-19 infection and requiring oxygen. Results of a study using routinely collected data Okay, so here's what they did. All right. They took data from 4 French hospitals with documented COVID pneumonia requiring oxygen, and they tried to emulate a trial. So, what they did, they were assessing hydroxychloroquine at 600 milligrams a day, with the endpoint being transfer to an intensive care unit within 7 days. Okay? They had 181 patients, 84 received the hydroxychloroquine within 48 hours of admission, and 97 did not. The severity between the groups was consistent, so they're saying wasn't one group was sicker than the other. Okay? Then they did the analysis. 20.2% of the patients in the hydroxychloroquine group were transferred to the ICU or died within 7 days, versus 22.1% in the no hydroxychloroquine group. Okay, 16 versus 21. The relative risk, if you were in the hydroxychloroquine group, was 0.91, meaning your risk was lower, but it didn't meet statistical significance because the confidence interval crosses 1 clearly. Okay, this is how these research guys look at scientific proof. Okay, so in the hydroxychloroquine group, 2.8% of the patients died within 7 days versus 4.6. Relative risk 0.61. But again, the confidence interval massively crossed 1. So it does not prove that the treatment was effective. Then they say, and in the no, okay, and then 27.4%, this is died within 7 days, 4.6 in the hydroxychloroquine group. 27.4 and 24.1% developed acute respiratory distress syndrome within 7 days, 24 versus 23. And in that one, the relative risk was actually higher for the hydroxychloroquine group. Okay, so again, didn't meet statistical significance. The results don't report the use of hydroxychloroquine. Okay, in patients that have hypoxic pneumonia. So there's a couple things going on. One is, in those patients, those were only patients that already had oxygen needs. So a significant amount of this whole constellation of symptoms had already occurred. The lung inflammation, the leaking of fluid. I mean, these people were needing oxygen already. So maybe not started early enough. Number 2, it certainly doesn't look like it caused any harm, right? I mean, overall, the one group was basically equal, one patient different, and the other groups sort of almost looked like, well, you know, a 0.9 and a 0.6 is a relative risk, but not statistically significant. No proof, according to the scientific guys. Now, here's something that meets statistical significance that shows favoring of hydroxychloroquine. This was an early study, and I shared it with you the other day. But this was 62 patients diagnosed with COVID in Wuhan, randomized, 31 got 5 days of hydroxychloroquine, and 31 did not. They looked at time to recovery, radiology results, and some other things. And basically, what they found, I showed you guys the graph that showed the statistical significance. What they found, the big things were that, I'm off by 1. Sorry, guys. Right here. Fever, control, no treatment, hydroxychloroquine, a day less. Cough, 3.1, 2.0, a day less. Progressed to severe illness, 4, which was 12%, 0. So, those met statistical significance, okay? So it looks like it does something at least early in treatment. In other words, there may not be clear scientific proof. Now, one thing I'm hearing, and I read a dialogue on this today, they're complaining, the docs are, particularly the academics, because nobody wants to be in the double-blind clinical controlled trial because they're afraid they're going to get the placebo. And I get it. I feel bad for them because they want to prove that it works, you know. But these are tough times. I think sometimes you got to make logical assumptions. This was the study that was done fairly early. Basically, Cliff Note version. It was a small sample size, but it showed hydroxychloroquine treatment significantly associated with viral load reduction. Implications for decreasing how infective you're going to be and getting other people sick. Implications for how long the virus is going to affect you. And that particular study seemed to have met clinical significance. All right. Now, I like this because this comes from a board, one that you would probably think would be at the top tier to be helping us with decision making here. So this is the Infectious Disease Society of America guidelines on the treatment and management of patients with COVID-19. Okay, so these are a bunch of talking heads that sit together and ruminate over, should we be doing anything for treatment? And this gets a little sticky, but try to bear with me. I'm going to give you the executive summary. Okay, it's a rapid increase in incidence of infections and death. We need some pharmacy. What are we going to do? These recommendations, okay, recommendations are labeled I'm going to read the highlighted. You guys don't see that very well. Recommendations are labeled as strong or conditional. The word recommend indicates strong recommendations and suggest indicates conditional recommendations. In situations where promising interventions were judged to have insufficient evidence of benefit to support their use and with potential applicable harms or costs, the expert panel recommended their use in the context of a clinical trial. The guideline panel used the word only in recommendations about therapeutic agents with higher uncertainty and or more potential for harm. Okay, so in that, recommendation number 1, among patients who have been admitted to the hospital with COVID-19, the Society Guideline Panel recommends hydroxychloroquine in the context of a clinical trial. So they still want the data, so they want you to do it in a clinical trial. But if you're reading between the lines, they recommend that if you're getting hospitalized with COVID-19, you get put in a clinical trial for hydroxychloroquine. They think it works. That's the way I'm reading this. Now, I didn't understand that COVID-19 recommends hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin only in the context of the clinical trial, meaning they think there's more chance of harm there. I can only infer that because both drugs are QT prolongers, okay? So both have that arrhythmogenic potential. And the Zithromax has the less robust antiviral, anti-COVID-19 data. Why put two QT prolongators in the mix? So I think that's what's going on there. And then all the rest of the stuff are onlys. So the only thing that met their recommendation, which is that strong recommend and no only in there, meaning they're really worried about the harm, is hydroxychloroquine. My stance is going to be to stick with hydroxychloroquine as an off-label use for my patient population as follows. I'm going to look at where they live. I have patients outside of Alaska. If they're in an area where the pretest probability is high and they have symptoms, I'm going to presume they have it. If the pretest probability in the area is quite low, I'm going to dig and say, okay, is there a known exposure mechanism? I'm going to ask them, how are you doing in the grocery store? Are you making sure you wash all your stuff when you come back? Are you one of these that's critical infrastructure and you're still working and you're around other people and you don't know how well they're doing? And then, is there somebody else compromised at home, or are they compromised? And all those things would factor in. But I'm going to have a pretty low threshold for hydroxychloroquine. And if I don't think they're particularly at cardiac risk, I'll probably throw the Z-Pack in there, tell them to take some magnesium, get on some zinc supplementation, and let that go. If it's a person that's healthy and they probably have the disease, but they are not currently feeling significantly compromised, I'm going to monitor them for compromise, providing that there's not some other extenuating circumstance. Meaning, look, if you don't get to where you're starting to feel short of breath, you're really having a hard time with this, I don't take medicine hardly for anything. And I'm not a big fan of I don't take, if you get a viral illness, you just take care of yourself until it's over. And that's what I would presume would be my recommendation to my healthy portion of the population that I know has a good microbiome and a good inflammatory status, and they're fit and have good lung function. They don't need to take hydroxychloroquine, and I think I'm going to stick with that recommendation. I just threw this one in here. One of my partners sent it. She said she's been taking this for a while. I didn't dig down. It's a supplement that's from a plant-based alkaloid, artemisinin, and apparently it's got antiviral properties. And I didn't dig down real deep, but you could look that up if you want. Artemisinin. My last slide. God, I probably went on and on and on. I hate to see what the time's going to be. This is kind of my introduction into my talk on motivation for taking care of yourself. This is the hospitalization rate for COVID-19, 4.6 per 100,000 population. 90% of hospitalized patients have some type of underlying condition, okay? So you notice this one's not talking about age. I've pointed out that age is a risk factor for chronic disease. Now, what risks do we see in the 65-year-old and greater? Well, they have a lot of cardiovascular disease. That looks to be a big factor, as is hypertension. Hypertension, I think, is the number one comorbidity across all, just in general, that you get admitted with. Now, diabetes looks to be pretty significant. Chronic lung disease, sorry about that. Chronic lung disease, obviously, we've gone through the mechanics of this. You need to have your air exchange system working. That's what the main initial insult is. But look at obesity. What do we see about obesity? Well, I'm sorry, it's going to be tough, okay? And I'm going to try to be very sensitive when we get to the motivation part. But which group does obesity affect the greatest? 18 to 49. Adults. Young, should otherwise be healthy adults. Why is obesity so low why is obesity so low a risk factor in the greater than 65? Well, I'll tell you a couple of reasons. Number one, the likelihood of you living past 65 declines every year if you're obese, okay? So there's not a lot of leftover, overweight people in this group. The other thing is, the World Health Organization, which I think is probably who almost every talking head uses to define obesity, uses about the dumbest measurement that you could possibly use. BMI, body mass index. Right now, I'm overweight. I'm kind of flabby right now. My Achilles tendon rupture, haven't been able to train, this has messed me up, less active. But when I'm at 7% body fat, I test overweight by BMI. 7% body fat, because it doesn't take into account muscularity. And by the way, being muscular decreases mortality, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. So what happens is BMI declines as people get old because they're losing muscle mass. Okay? I know that was a long explanation there, but back to this. It's the number one risk factor for you getting hospitalized at 18 to 49. First data point on motivation to exercise and eat right, okay? We got to control our weight, folks. And it's low-hanging fruit. One of the things you might have taken away from this talk is it's not exactly clear when this is going to be over. You are probably going to get this virus. You may be living in eastern Montana, one of my friends in Sydney. You may be here in Alaska. Maybe you're one of the places where there's a ton of virus, you've already had it, and you made it through it and didn't know it. I hope that's you. But there's a good chance you've not had it yet. We're not going to know for many months, probably. There's a significant chance that you're going to get this virus a year from now. The next second wave, next year's thing. Will there be a vaccine? We don't know. Hey, some of these things can be addressed, okay? I can address that cardiovascular system and make that blood pressure come down. I can lose weight. I can't probably do much about my lung function. I can become more sensitive to insulin. So we're going to talk about motivation. I'm going to make sure you understand it tomorrow. Sorry I went so long. I hope you enjoyed it.